going to just send a quick tweet to let people know we've gone live.
Okay.
And I'm going to play the music.
Do it!
I got to make it louder. Hi, I'm Rebecca Cohen.
And I'm Maya Grant.
And this is The Sauce Live, where we get drunk and ruin the stuff you love.
And today we are going to ruin quarantine life for you. We are ruining, analyzing, deconstructing Tiger King, the Netflix special.
Yeah. Yeah, all you cool cats and kittens. We're going to dive into that show that everybody loves and tell you what it all means.
And why people love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, before we do that, as we usually do, we should check in and see how we're doing. Maya, how are you? What are you drinking?
I am drinking some Fortaleza tequila and lime, which is just so straight up awesome.
Just tequila and lime, huh?
Just tequila and lime. It's so good. I can only do it with Fortaleza. It's so good. And
Sounds
I'm
good.
okay. I had to go to the drugstore, and even now touching my face still feels very fraught. Like there's something about
Oh, yeah.
like going out, like I haven't been out in like days. And being out, you're like, and I was wearing a mask, and I was like, did somebody breathe here 10 seconds? Like, I don't know. And like, it's rather
It's very
stressful. Yeah.
stressful. I find myself forgetting that I don't have to wash my hands after touching things around my house sometimes, you know? Yeah. And my husband Matt and I were both saying we were watching Westworld on HBO, and people like touch their faces, and you're like, don't do that. And you
I know.
forget that
I know.
they have
You
other
have to
concerns and
watch
stuff.
Contagion. The whole conversation on Contagion is really like they're always talking about face touching and, Kate Winslet, and it's not to be missed. So
Well,
what are you drinking?
I am drinking tequila and pink drink. I honestly don't know what flavor it is. We have the Soda Stream, and we buy all these different flavors to make soda, and some of them are pink. It's probably either like a cranberry watermelon or like strawberry something, but I'm just putting tequila in it because
Very
that's
nice.
easy to do. And I'm feeling a little
Tequila,
bit
you
lazy.
and me.
I know, both of us, right?
To you.
Cheers.
L'chaim.
Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah, happy Passover. I guess that's a thing.
Dude, I'll tell you later about the crazy religious guy who just sent me some matzah in the mail. We're going to be making our own matzah. It's a long story. It's
Wait,
a story for another time.
making your own matzah, just real quick. You're going to be making your own matzah.
Yeah.
Okay. Like you made some hamburger buns and they turned out okay. So now
I made a challah, which I left too long on the second rise, so it kind of lost its braided shape. It overrose, but it was edible and quite tasty.
that's good.
And now matzah, and just as a special part of it, the second it's, done, we're going to run. I'm going to set a timer,
Yeah.
and I'm going to make my son
You have
pack
to
up his room
time that shit. Yeah. You're going to
so he
make
can
your
really feel
son
like it's,
pack up his room?
so he feels like we're really fleeing.
Oh.
I'm just going to add a little urgency to
In
it.
case any non-Jews aren't following, matzah, the flat cracker crap that Jews have to eat at Passover, is supposed to represent the unleavened bread that Jews had only enough time to make as they were fleeing from slavery in Egypt. The whole thing with the parting of the Red Sea and all that stuff from the movie.
And not surprisingly, it is apparently very easy to make. I'm going to make it with my son, and I'm going to use it to reinscribe fear. He's such a soft kid. He doesn't have immigrant parents. He needs to feel afraid.
I'm sure that's healthy. I I'm not going to. I know what happens when I critique your parenting skills, so I'll let that be.
I
You
love when you
parent
critique my parenting
as
skills.
yeah, right. You parent as you see best. I wanted to do something really quickly that we haven't done in a few episodes.
Yeah.
I'm excited to move on and talk about Tiger King, but I have to do this because we like to thank our patrons in episodes and show our gratitude at least in that one small way. And we haven't done it in some time, and there's a couple of patrons who are owed a little bit of a shout out, and I didn't think to get this open before we started, which is really unprofessional, and I apologize for that, viewers and listeners. But here we are. I wanted to thank Sarah Nad Yilmaz, Ali Solberg, and Raven Vance. Anyone else I've forgotten? Ray Giles. Thank you, along with all of our other patrons on Patreon. If I have not ever thanked you, make sure you've listened to every episode because you got to be sure. No, but if I haven't, check your messages on Patreon because we like to communicate with our members of our Patreon, and we try to reach out, and we will have asked you if it's okay to use your name, but we're not going to use your name without your permission. So check those messages.
Yes,
If you've never gotten a message from us, feel free to give us a shout out or give us a shout rather,
absolutely.
and we will definitely
Thank you for
thank
your
you.
support. We have plans for your support once quarantine is over,
I know we might have
including
to
our
think of some
first.
quarantine safe things we can do, but
All right.
we really
Well,
wanted to
okay.
do videos where we could be in the same location, and the expense
Yeah.
involved is going to be considerable. So, patrons, we are saving up and we are getting there. It's going to happen.
And if you guys want to also donate your frequent flyer miles, that will help with our production costs greatly. Thank you so much. Okay.
Are we ready to do this?
I think we're ready to do this. I think we have to talk about this. I think we have to get her
Okay.
done.
So, I'm starting a timer
Mm.
because our last attempt at a live feed, it wasn't like formally an actual episode. But when we went live on YouTube, we intended to go for like 5 to 10 minutes and we talked for 45 minutes. So let's try to keep things under control. You ready?
Okay. I'm ready.
Let's go.
Okay. So first we just wanted to start really briefly by talking about its huge appeal. I mean, there's something about Tiger King hitting Netflix at the moment where everybody is stuck at home, which is like,
Yes.
and I think like the general sort, you like that kind of
Yeah, I like the
the
visual.
general
We can do that now. We're on video. We can add a visual element.
whatever. We are two mouthy bitches who are Jews and use their hands. Okay. Okay. But I feel like there's part of it which is just that straight up love seeing white trash. There's some kind of Cohen brothers appeal to it, flair to it, except it's real. It's like these kind of 2-bit hood crooks that are kind of losers and fail, plus tigers. And there's this thing that happened at the end where they were talking about how, by the way, spoilers are all over this.
Oh,
Spoilers
we
all
should.
over this.
We totally forgot to mention that.
So
Spoiler
many
alert.
spoilers.
Turn us off if
We're not
you
even
want
we're
to
going to
avoid
release
spoilers.
this.
Yeah.
We're going to release the audio. We're going to release it. It's going to
Yeah.
be on
You'll get
YouTube.
a chance to, for sure, listen later after you've watched Tiger King, which you have to do, not just because everyone's doing it, but because it is fucking amazing. So, spoiler alert out of the
so
way. Continue what you were saying about
so
watching
there was
trash.
so yeah, you're kind of washing white trash. We're going to get into the specific flavors of the appeal of Joe Exotic in a brief moment, but I
Mm,
feel like it has that kind of, it's like that Cohen brothers comedy and then the bottom drops out of it. It has that burlesque feel to it where it's like you laugh, you cry, it's grotesque, it's appealing, it's all of it at the same time. And there was this thing at the end where somebody talked about why they put his uh his murder charges with the animal cruelty charges, because people actually give a shit about animals.
yeah.
They won't
Yeah.
about actual people. And I feel like that's 100% true. Like if this was a documentary about people keeping like immigrants in cages or something, like immigrant children or
Right,
something.
right, right. But if it's keeping tigers in cages, You get people's attention. They care about that shit.
Yep.
That matters. Now that is a sad reality of life. And I think there's also this element of just like Schadenfreude that it is eternal. Everyone always likes to watch people who are just more pathetic than they are. It it helps you feel better about your life, and we all need to feel a little better about our lives right now. And I also think there's an extent to which, over the past few years, and especially the past few weeks and months, we've had to exercise empathy so much. There have been so many occasions to tax our empathy that it's getting to the point where our empathy needs a rest. And so there is a certain pleasure in watching people who it's a little hard to empathize with, and you can feel superior toward, and you
I
can feel a
think
little bit of
that's
Schadenfreude around.
yeah, but then there's also so there's the usual sort of snooty whatever,
Hmm.
but they play into that and they are in possession of tigers and they are men who own and possess and manipulate and control tigers and there's this wild life that they're living that they seem super proud of. They're like outside of society, they are bigger than, they are greater than. That's why it reminds me of burlesque. Like in an old burlesque show,
Mm.
you would have the strippers, of course, but then you would have the comics and you would have the tenor singers to sing kind of songs that make you cry.
Hmm.
So it hits every button. Like you get hard, you laugh, you cry. That's like
You're
it's
experiencing all these different things, even conflicting things.
yes, but
Yes.
all of them are just put right next to each other in an order. And so I feel like that's part of this appeal too. The
Mm.
Biggest Loser has similar appeal. I think Honey Boo Boo, I think like
Sure.
any of those shows have that similar appeal because the brashness and the sort of extreme, like, fuck all of you, I'm going to do this. There's something about that that's like, you kind of admire that. There's something about
Right.
that that you're
It
like,
makes you root for
okay,
them.
you,
Absolutely.
that's it.
All right. So it's like you said with burlesque, you're kind of experiencing both at the same time. You're experiencing this kind of superiority and gratification from not being those people. You're
Yes.
experiencing that sort of watching a train wreck whole thing where you can't look away because it's so strange and in many ways awful, and you're experiencing identification with them and sympathy for them. So
Absolutely.
there's a lot going on at the same time.
And it's titillating, the sex and the like, there's all this stuff that it titillates, you feel superior, you admire. It's
Yes.
like a burlesque show.
So now we're going to talk about a little bit about this dynamic between Carol and Joe, right? Carol Baskin, the sort of animal rights, self styled animal rights advocate, and Joe Exotic, the big king of all tigers. So I, I think this is a good starting place because while I was watching the show, I kept feeling this nagging feeling of like, I've seen this dynamic somewhere before. The way that they play off each other, the way that they hate each other, um, it seemed familiar. And so I wanted to start with that question. Why does it seem familiar? Where have we seen this before? What is it reflecting and resonating with in real life?
Well, I mean, I think where you start with is like, I think what we're looking at is not so much the documentary as people's responses to the documentary. Like there's this huge like response to this kind of war, like Team Joe Exotic, Team Carol, like I feel
Mm,
like that's what so grabs people, at least in the first half of the show.
mm.
And I feel like what it's about, and I know you guys are going to be so surprised to hear us say this.
We think we discussed this before a little bit, and we both
A little
seem
bit.
to notice there's just a touch of the misogyny going on in this story.
Just,
I mean,
and I'm not saying in the show, I'm saying in the
no.
response to the show. I'm
Well,
saying,
I'm saying both for sure.
okay,
Both.
okay.
I absolutely think there's misogyny in the way that Joe and others feel about Carol, like
Oh,
for sure.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But I,
I
I
don't
feel like I don't see misogyny from the documentarians, but I feel like
know,
the
although I
kind of war that they are setting up is dependent
on
on,
sure there's an
yeah.
observation of misogyny, and I think a close read with a close read you could make an argument that the way the story is framed in various ways, um, the choices that the filmmakers made, you could make an argument that there's misogyny there. You could probably make an argument against it, but
Well,
we're not getting there right now. That's a lot. What I want to talk about is, like you said, uh, the misogyny within the story of the show and with the reaction. You see all these like memes, uh, and a lot of them are kind of viciously hateful of Carol Baskin.
yeah.
Yeah, a lot of calling her bitch and cunt and things like that.
And she murdered her husband, and
Oh, she.
OJ Simpson
Oh my god.
going on Twitter and being like, "Oh yeah, she murdered her husband." You're like,
Yeah, well, he would know, I guess.
"Yeah, yeah, yeah,
That's the
yeah."
idea. So, indeed, there's some misogyny there. And I think thinking about the way that Joe specifically just hates Carol so much led me to recognize something I have seen before, which is the dynamic of like Gamergate or online MRAs and online feminists or other social justice activists, but primarily that sort of MRA feminist thing where they're back and forth.
Well, also because the meme that I saw, that I was like, at first when I saw it, I was like, "Oh, whatever." But then as the show went on, I'm like, "Oh yeah." Is this meme where it's Carol Baskin and Joe Exotic, but they've replaced their faces with Hillary and Trump?
So let's talk about that in a second because I absolutely
Okay.
want to talk about the analogies there.
So I feel like what we're talking about is less about misogyny and more about this particular dynamic that's being set up and being acted out
Yeah.
in this,
Yeah.
which we've seen.
But
We've
it's
seen this
often
a lot of recent years. It's deeply rooted in misogyny, but it's like the
yes.
this versus the that in this battle.
But misogyny is typically involved in the times we've seen it, like with Gamergate. And it's not just hatred, it's this particular type of back and forth where, Gamergate hated Anita Sarkeesian and other prominent feminists, Zoe Quinn. And to be fair, um, a lot of people, I'm not going to accuse anyone of anything, but a lot of people who were attacked, and again, I want to be clear that I don't mean that like they wanted to be attacked or it was a good thing or anything like that. But as a result, people got a lot of notoriety from it and increased their own profiles and increased their own Kickstarter
And
income.
so there was the explosive hatred, and then there was the benefit that the hated got
Yes. And
by
then there's the
being the
benefit.
public target, by being this public
Exactly.
target
And
that
there's
these
a
people.
benefit that the haters get, where
Yes.
they raise their own profile and build their followings all based on this, defining themselves around this enemy. It's not so much what they're for. It's about like, ooh, we hate this group or these specific people. You see it also, I think, a lot with far left, brocialists and Bernie bros, and the way that they interact with people that they deem to be their enemies, like centrist Democrats, they call them, or
Right.
neoliberals. We've talked about
Right.
leftist performances in previous episodes, and they're doing a similar thing. They have that sort of like deep resentment that seems rooted in a combination of misogyny, which just tends to be present in these situations, and also this feeling that the hated person is a hypocrite. They are a liar
Yes.
and a hypocrite. They are not what they claim to be. We can see
Yes.
through them, but
Yep.
no one else can. Everyone else
Yeah.
thinks they're great and is believing they're lying, and it irritates them, infuriates them so deeply. And you see that so much with Joe Exotic. He hates Carol not just because she's trying to shut down his zoo, but because she is posing as this morally superior, morally righteous crusader for good, and people are donating money left and right and buying that, and he sees through it and
And
thinks she's, yeah,
she was on top of the social media thing, so she was there first.
right,
She gets
right.
all the hits
Well,
on
and
Facebook.
she's rich. She's rich from having killed her husband, so he claims. And so she's got this privilege and entitlement, and she doesn't have to deal with all the problems of not having all that money. It's this really powerful resentment. And you see that
I
like with Chapo Trap House, for example,
yes.
that type of like, dirtbag left stuff. Uh, they talk so much, like they define themselves. Why is Chapo big? Why are any of their associated people and the Young Turks and all those folks on Twitter? They've created these huge followings out of hating certain people and being
Absolutely.
against them.
And what's amazing is that they set up the framework, and it doesn't matter who the target is, because the story they're telling is always the same. And that's why I found it really interesting the way they went after Elizabeth Warren. They wanted to tell the story about her privilege, and she's more kind of folksy from real America than
Right,
any of those dudes could ever be. But that story has to be, she's not what she appears. This
right.
person is not what she appears. The story that they're telling about themselves is not the real story, and I know it. And that's the narrative that kind of happens on the other. Now, on the other side, what's the performance by the person who's being targeted? I mean, it changes, but I feel like there's a way that obviously, like, Carol also needs them to hate her.
Oh, a hundred
Like, there's
percent. And she needs
totally,
to hate them. I mean, that's her whole thing. Is she is naming them as enemies.
yes,
They are the evil empire that she's against, and she has defined herself and her fame and her success in her endeavors and her whole platform. Everything she has in that regard comes from her positioning herself in opposition to them. So she profits off hating them
absolutely.
and off, I'm sure, being hated by them because, as we've seen time and again, if you can point to someone who's attacking you, you win the sympathy of a lot of people who also dislike the attackers. And it just sort of goes back and forth in that dynamic.
So it's a mutually dependent
Yes.
sort of relationship. It's a sort of symbiotic relationship. Like, you can't have one without the other. Or like, maybe you could. I think you could have had a Hillary without Trump. And this is where I want to get to the Hillary thing. And we've spoken about this before. One thing that, again, if you go back to Skip Gates's article about Hillary in the late 90s, he talks about how she shows up in Washington with Bill, and she's smarter than everybody, and she has the self-righteousness of this like goody two shoes 60s liberal
Mm-hmm.
headband wearing. She knows she's doing
Our
this for good.
timer has gone. So
We're
finish
almost
your
done. We're
thought.
almost done. I will. Like, she's this goody two shoes, and there was something about that that made the right wing so fucking mad that they had to turn her into Lady Macbeth for the next 20 years, which was the baggage
Yes.
that she was weighed with during the election. Like, she was so like, she's doing this, she thinks she's doing this to be good. It can't be that somebody's
Right.
trying to help people. Like, and it made them crazy. And we see how it made people like our fathers crazy, and they
Yeah.
had to turn her into a murderer. And that's where the Trump Hillary thing, like,
Oh,
they are
yeah, that's where the
so
analogy really
committed.
yeah.
They are so committed to Carol Baskin being a murderer. And as kind of delightful as it is to think that this kind of hippie lady like murdered her husband and fed him to some tigers, like, it's kind of delightful to
Yeah,
sort of
and
thought experiment.
I wouldn't blame her. He seemed like a real dick.
That's what I'm saying. Like, you hear the story about this guy with all of these like unlicensed flights to Costa Rica, and he picked her up on the street, and he had a gun, and he was like, "You can hold the gun on me." Like, the guy seemed kind of
No, the dude
a
was bearing gold bars in his
like
backyard.
yeah,
Like,
he,
this is not normal. He needed to go. So good
like
job, Carol. I don't think she fed him to any tigers, but like
I
if
don't
she
think
had a hand in him getting thrown out of a plane over the Gulf, then good
I
work.
I just I just don't but also I just don't see it. Like, I feel like the likelihood that he was wrapped, and he was always a businessman, but even the people closest to him can't really tell you where the money came from or what the
Right?
business were. Like,
Right.
is it likelier that he was got into some trouble on the morning that he was supposed to escape to Costa Rica in his unlicensed plane? Like, what's more likely? What's more
Right,
likely that
right,
his
right.
wife, like, that is not what, but people need her to be a murderer.
They
They need it. They need it. They
absolutely,
need
and
it.
they also think Hillary's a murderer. Like you said, it's actually very similar in that regard that someone presenting herself as good and knowledgeable. And they didn't call Elizabeth Warren a murderer, but they did call her a snake, and the implication that she's devious and a liar snake.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we've seen that. And there are, of course, many ways in which Joe Exotic is like Donald Trump. Now, this, like you said, the whole thing with Hillary goes way back before 2016, and we just saw it sort of like fulminate. But
But and what we're saying is that, and this is kind of our next sort of segment where we want to transition it to. So, we're Team Carol, but clearly these people and their dynamic with each other is symbiotic, it's mutually dependent, and they have a lot of things in common. And one of the big things that they have in common is that they all have cults. They all have this kind of like cultic
yeah,
following. They have these
okay,
like,
we're gonna hold on. We're gonna get into that in a second. Before we do, as just a trend, as not a transition, but a interstitial little break between segments, we do have a question on our live comments.
oh
So
yeah.
Alexis Wong asks, "Is the virus isn't making Ziv feel afraid? You mentioned Ziv, your son, earlier. Is
Oh,
he feeling afraid?"
um, yes. He asks weird questions about, like, we were talking about my my grandparents and how I never knew them, and my parents were orphans pretty young, and he was like, "Am I going to be an orphan?" Like, yeah, there's like a little bit of that, but I feel like it's almost like worrying because it is so weirdly distant right now. Like, we're all trapped at home. He's
Yeah.
a smart kid. He's like, I was reading in the Atlantic about how COVID. We're like, really?
If he's
Like,
reading the
he's
Atlantic, he can't be that smart.
but he's,
Kid.
he's reading about how, like, how pets maybe are able to transmit it, and he's like, he's trying to get a handle on it. And in some ways I think it's actually more like, by trying to make it immediate to him,
Yeah.
he's trying to relate to it more.
Yeah.
Like, he
He's
is
trying
not
to
under actual threat, but he's trying to
put
find
it
a
into
way to,
some
like,
kind of frameworks that are directly pertaining to his own life so it can be
and his
meaningful to
own
him.
reality.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. But we also talk about how many people, at the dinner table were like, oh, 15 died today. Like,
yeah.
we're talking about it.
Yeah. Well, I don't envy you having to deal with that aspect of things. All right, okay, let's resume. I'm going to start the timer again. Reset, start. We are going
This
to,
is usually the stuff you guys don't hear when
right?
you're listening to us. When we reset the timer, we're showing you all of our dirt,
Yeah,
man.
getting to see
All of it.
behind the
Getting it.
curtain. All right,
So
cults.
cults.
Can we
So,
can we just talk for a second about Doc Antle because
oh,
he's the
wow.
most obviously
Wow.
like most clearly cult-like of
Wow,
them.
that guy totally, and I'm saying this as an Oingo Boingo fan, but that guy listens to Oingo Boingo. That is he reads Ayn Rand.
Oh,
He
absolutely.
he totally read Jonathan Livingston Seagull too many times as a kid. Like, that guy is so, my favorite interview of the whole thing was the woman who escaped the cult. The woman who
Yeah.
was like, yeah, I got a boob job just so I could sleep for a few days.
I loved that. I mean, this is terrible, but I was like very impressed by that. I mean, what would you do for a free boob job? Hard to say.
what would you do to be able to like change your name to like
Right.
Bodhisattva and follow the Bhagwan, and like he has such
The
an amazing,
Bhagwan.
and like he feels like he's, I mean, literally calls himself Bhagavan,
Yeah.
like oh, it's and with his, there's that moment where like he's like, you're supposed to clean the chain, my shirt's dirty. You're like, this is
I
just some
oof.
abusive
Yeah,
motherfucker.
he's an
Like,
abusive dick, but he found this niche, this world.
I
Like
know.
guys like that just go around being dicks, and some are more successful than others, but he found a niche where he's not just like he has his sort of five white guy friends who think he's the coolest, but he has like loads of people. He has women in his sex cult who are like
Yeah.
getting tortured for the chance to have sex with him and pet tigers, take care of tigers. I mean, he really.
I mean,
I gotta give him
look,
credit.
it's like whenever we see something like that, there are times when Ben will just look at it and he'll go, so many ways to live.
Sorry, so many ways to live.
So many
It's
ways to
true.
live. But I feel like there's some people who do want to be told what to do and not have to deal with the disconcerting quality of having to make your own decisions
Oh
all
yeah,
the time.
yeah.
Like, I think
That's
that they're
how cults
definitely,
work.
that's how cults work. Like, somebody is telling you, you know how every hour of the day is going to go. Like, he's found
Yeah,
these women who find it,
a lot of
but
people don't
but
want agency, but
but Carol, and somebody like that tells a whole story about how like people don't want agency, and some people are rulers, and some people are sheep, and some people are tigers, and
right,
like
right,
it's
right.
all of that very like 18-year-old boy high on pot like philosophy class, like
Yes.
intro philosophy. It's like he never got past that stage, you know. But Carol, although in a much more female functional way, also has like armies of volunteers who like wear the red t-shirt for 5 years so
Yeah.
that they can go on to wear the green t-shirt
And
and the blue
yeah, so and
t-shirt.
the show does a great job of juxtaposing what the
Oh yeah.
different yes, what these different personalities are doing and the ways in which they are doing the same things under different names and different guises. And yeah, she has those volunteers who work long hours and they have to kiss her ass in their own ways
And
and
she doesn't even know what their name is till they've
right.
been there for so many years that she kind of has to learn it, and like, yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, everybody gets a little drunk on fame and power,
You
that
know.
sort of
and
thing.
then and then Joe Exotic has like an island of misfit toys. Like,
Hmm.
those are the who are the people who you feel like the, like you feel the most sort of
Yeah,
sympathy for, this like
they're
island of
so
misfit
sad.
toys.
Yeah, he has this wonderful group of outcasts that
Yeah.
are, I think, the most sympathetic people in the whole thing. And it's interesting that he is a cult leader, though, in like, he is a sociopath, as cult leaders are, and he, I don't want to say targets, maybe that's too pointed, but he finds people who are down on their luck. He finds people just out of jail. And there's a part of that that is kind of lovely. Like, this person has nowhere to go. I'm going to give them somewhere to go. And there's a part of
I'm
that that
going to
is,
give them responsibilities, and they're going to
yes,
like,
something to live for.
and
But
something to love, and yeah,
yeah.
totally.
And also, there's a way in which it's a cult. You pick people who have nowhere else to go, so they can't refuse you. They
Even
can't.
if their arm gets torn off
Right. They'll
by
still
a tiger.
protect you. Well, she was protecting the tigers, or he. I've heard that that person now
Identifies as
identifies now.
okay.
I don't know. Let's just say they, but they were one of my favorite characters. But
Oh yeah.
all of Joe's people were wonderful, and it's really heartbreaking when the documentary gets to the point where it's revealing their living conditions and they're picking food out of the Walmart truck and just really busting their asses
Well,
working
all
so
of these
hard.
people, and I feel like all of these people, Carol's people, Doc Annell's people, and Joe's people, and the documentarian puts it together. They are all working for nothing. They are working like dogs 7 days out of 7
Mm-hmm.
for like as little money as can as like no money.
Right.
Like that's what it is. Like you come to volunteer to do this thing. Yeah.
Are they doing it just for the tigers? Just to be near tigers? I mean, I could see that as being quite a rush and something, but I also
Yeah.
can't see myself living in like a, a straw on the floor, on the concrete floor barn
Yeah,
with
but also
bugs everywhere.
we were never cult followers. And
Right.
that's something that I think about a lot because I'm fascinated with cults and I've done a lot of study on cults. And that's a whole episode we've never even gotten to do about like cults and Donald Trump and cults. And like for all my fascination and absorption with it, I was never a cult follower. Like I
Yeah.
never fell into a cult. And I'm not, and I think that there is something where I feel like the desire to be part of something bigger than yourself is as human of a need as sex and food and
Yeah.
sleep and
Yeah.
all of those things. And so like the
That's
form
well
that
said.
takes is going to be the form it takes is going to be different. And I feel like, and it's the same with like the straight husbands. You know what I mean? Like what the
Right.
fuck are
Right.
they doing there?
Y-
They're like,
So, don't you think there's something more going on? I mean, yes, these are folks who need something in their lives in a most literal sense, like they're ex-cons who have nowhere to go, and probably in a more spiritual sense, in a sense of purpose and belonging, and they're getting all of that. Um, is there something about Joe Exotic himself or Carol Baskin herself that's
well,
compelling to them?
I think this is where we have to talk about the weird response to the show. Like, people are all getting their Joe Exotic costumes ready
Mm-hmm.
for Halloween. Like, people are so ready to be Joe Exotic. And, and again, I didn't, and part of it is like, he's so shameless. He's this queer guy in like in Oklahoma and he's going to wear his sparkly shit and he's going to sing his country songs and do videos and like rock his haircut, rock his clothes. Like it's like he knows he's a clown but he also like goes for it. But I, I find it strange that people enjoy it so much when he's shown to be such a horrible exploiter. Like
Yeah.
he's like this Trumpian figure, like the way that he sucks the money out of his mother, the way he treats his workers, the way he treats these animals, the way he treats these like men in his life. Like what is going
Yeah.
on with this sort of admiration of
Yeah.
him? And it's like that,
He's
yeah.
a bad person. He's a user and an exploiter, and
Has narcissistic
it's
personality
all,
disorder,
yeah, it's
like all of
all
it.
about him. Everything's about him. Like the scene where they interview his one husband's mom, the one,
Travis's mom.
yeah,
Oh my
Travis's mom. It's like
god.
it's so heartbreaking, and to see her sort of processing it even as she's talking, that the way that Joe had to make the memorial service about himself, like he had to,
And about having sex with that guy.
yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
this handsome guy fucked me. Like that's what the memorial was about.
Oh,
It was about
that's our
I'm famous.
timer. Wow.
Oh my god, we are nowhere near. We
No.
I think we're going to have to say 5 more minutes cuz
Okay,
we haven't
okay.
even gotten to the Trump
Okay, well,
like
we'll talk about. Okay, 5 minutes. I'll put it 5 more minutes. I knew this was going to happen. Not 5 hours, please. Delete that.
no, it's not going to be 5 hours.
Not 50 minutes. Start. Okay, so back to what we were saying. Yes, he is incredibly narcissistic. Everything is about him and his need to be on some kind of pedestal, to be on that throne, which is just like fucking
Yeah.
Trump. It is a lot like Trump.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there is
And part of the hatred of Carol Baskin is absolutely like Trump. Like it's those people, because they're crooks and criminals, they can't imagine that anyone else in the world, I've known so many people like this, it's like they can't imagine that anyone else in the world has different values than them. Like it is
mm,
unimaginable to them that somebody could be possibly different, that they could
Right.
care about different things, that they could be doing things for good reasons. Like they
Yeah.
have to be crooks. Like when Trump goes on a press conference and he's like, they want those ventilators so they can fence them. And you're like, are you mad?
Yeah,
Like,
he has no imagination and he has no moral compass. So
yeah.
he just assumes everyone around him is as like venal and
Yes.
completely
Yes.
amoral as he is, and it's
Yes.
and yet in never in a different way than he is. They always do exactly what he's done or would do,
Yes.
and you see that with Joe exactly. As I think you pointed out, he's he sort of can't understand why he's the one in jail when she should be in jail, and
Or like why he's the one in jail when Jeff
oh,
Lowe, he's not a narcissist. He's just a con man. You
he's
know what I
yeah,
mean? Like, and you're like, okay, like he's like, well, they did bad things too, or they were part of this. And it's like, it doesn't matter.
right,
Legally, you
right,
did an illegal, horrible,
right. You
disgusting
paid
thing.
someone to kill someone. That's yeah.
It doesn't matter if other people were involved who didn't get in trouble. It's this very toddler version.
Oh
Like,
no, that
why am
was
I getting in trouble? Because he did it too. It's like,
no.
doesn't fucking.
When I used to teach fifth grade, that was like the refrain. I feel like, no talking. Student's name. It's silent reading time, and they're talking. You don't say anything to them. It's like, God, that's irritating. But that aside, back to the topic. So yes, Joe Exotic is a terrible person. He has done bad things. He is not repentant for it, and it appears that he's not entirely capable of being. He may not even know right from wrong on some level, but people still sort of are rooting for him and liking him. And I get that there is an ironic element to that, and it goes back to what we were talking about at the top with the Schadenfreude and the train wreck thing, and just like, whoa, this guy is so weird and kooky, and he's such a crazy mix of things you don't expect to see together that he's just fun and funny and wow. But I do think there is.
And he can run for governor of Oklahoma and get 19% of the vote.
I do think though that there's a level of admiration there, or identification, or both, that people are rooting for him.
Well,
And
you even see it in the weird tension of all of his island of misfit toys, and how at the end of the day, when he's in trial, they all turn against him, and then they also feel bad about it. And it's like,
yeah.
it's really. But something that you mentioned,
Mhm.
that is interesting is that, like, he's Trump, but he's not. And the things that you said about the ways that he's Trump, and that he's a narcissistic sociopath who projects everything he does onto other people, and like can't take responsibility for his actions, and like all of those things. And he's kind of a cult leader in those ways. Um, but you were quite compelling on how he's not, even though I'm still thinking about it.
Well, he has this element of vulnerability to him that you never see with Trump. And I think this is a big part of going back to the burlesque thing you talked about, and the combination of different feelings that are sort of side by side, juxtaposed, or even at the same time. You're simultaneously kind of laughing at him and feeling bad for him and identifying with him and disdaining him. Like it's all happening at the same time. And a big part of that is this vulnerability. He treats these husbands of his horribly, but also he's so lonely. And maybe
Yeah.
he's not capable of loving like in the sense that our best poets and novelists would define loving another, selflessly. That's their alarm again. Um, but he does his need for affection. It's not like Donald Trump's need to control people and have their loyalty and have the
And
love of the
dominate.
masses and
Right.
be, as famous as possible. It's like a really tender, sad, pathetic. He just wants someone to be his dearest. He just wants that person,
Right.
and it's very tender and relatable, I think, to anyone. And it
He
humanizes
also
him in a way you can't get past.
And it also, he's always going to be a queer in Oklahoma. So there's a way
Right.
that he's always this outsider. He knows he's kind of the sideshow freak, but he still owns it. Trump is a sideshow freak, but doesn't know it.
That's the
Like the
huge
story, like,
difference. Trump,
but
I want to emphasize that
right,
he is doing this clown show that he thinks is something completely different. There is absolutely a sense in which Joe Exotic knows he's a clown show. He kind of gets drunk on the fame and attention it gets him in a way that blurs lines where you're not sure what he's serious about, and I don't think he's sure either.
right. So, but finally, I think the place we wanted to land on
Mm-hmm.
with this is that, so there are all of these cultists with all of their cult problems.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think we're left at the end with this question of like, what's the real cult?
Yes. The the one line in the show that really stood out to me, even though it wasn't emphasized so much, it wasn't a theme that was brought out a lot, was when the reality TV show producer, who was like,
Which,
we loved,
by
favorite character.
especially because I have to say, as a director, when he didn't back up his footage, I I screamed out loud.
But you
Like
always back up your footage, right?
I have two copies of the video that I just shot on
Yeah.
discs on hard drives in different
Who
states.
doesn't
Okay.
back up their video? Like, what is
He
that?
was like, this was my retirement and I hadn't backed up any of my footage. I screamed out loud. Like
Well,
I couldn't, I had to
and he was
pause the whole
right.
thing and just like,
He was right. That would have been his retirement because you could absolutely imagine that reality show in the context of
oh my
Honey Boo Boo
God.
and
Not just Honey Boo Boo in the yeah, and what's his dog, the bounty
yeah,
hunter,
yeah.
like yeah, 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 yeah,
You could see where that would fit and how this one would be in that vein, but have its whole own story to tell that's different.
totally.
What a great, what a great property he stumbled upon, and you know, whatever we can talk about not backing up your footage, and and all of that. But boy, he had a great craggy face and this wonderful voice, and boy,
And the
he,
cigarettes
yeah, this, yeah, and the dark
and
black hat,
trauma,
yeah, and the
also
trauma.
the trauma.
He was great, and he had this one line that
Uh-huh.
was at the very end when they're wrapping up and people are just sort of trying to talk about what they learned from it or what they got out of it or where they are now. And he said one of his regrets was that as the time had gone on, Joe had lost interest in the animals and had become much, much more interested in Joe Exotic. And I don't remember the exact way he phrased it, but he said something like, and he got involved with the animals again. It sort of prolonged his involvement with the animals because of the reality show. And I'll always regret that or I'll always wonder about that. That his presence there with the cameras telling Joe, you're going to be on reality TV, changed the way Joe behaved.
Yeah.
He talked about it too. He talked about how he would throw temper tantrums and put on a kind of character for the cameras that didn't happen when the cameras weren't on. And I mean that's to be expected, but that's the thing. The mistreatment of the animals and so much of what we see is in service of reality TV fame.
Yeah.
It's a false reality. A lot of it's real. You can see that in the past it was real, but how much of it wasn't even real in the sense that it was just being acted out in order to have something for the reality TV cameras.
Right,
And
right. And then there's that, I mean, and the final line, yeah, that it provoked him into staying the tiger guy. And the
yeah,
cult is reality TV.
yeah,
That's the cult.
that's the real cult. That's
But then are we just, we're just continuing the cult by being so obsessed with this documentary.
yeah,
Like that's, so
100%.
that's it. And and I think the documentary knows it. I mean, that was the
They
part,
do.
like,
The documentary is
yeah.
so self-aware, and it's put together so subtly, and and artfully.
And
I
with real formal kind of authority that every episode goes to another chamber of it that you're not quite there yet. Even if
Yeah.
they've hinted at it or hinted at it by omission and then they deliver it, it's very gentle. Formally, it's constructed very, very well. And then they save that footage of him at the very beginning of his tiger zoo being like, these animals aren't supposed to be here. They're not
Yeah.
supposed to be in Oklahoma.
Save that to
Like
the
that
very end. Yeah.
the very last footage is quite brilliant, but the mass appeal of it is the same as the reality TV cult, and that's why they kind of give the reality TV guy the first word and the last word. And it must be so painful for that guy.
Could you imagine? I can't even begin to imagine. But
Oh my
that's the
god.
thing that, yeah, in the
Could have been
end,
his. It could have been his retirement, man.
yeah, in the end, that's the cult.
Mm.
Fame.
Oh man.
Okay.
And that's Trump's cult. I mean, just to like bring it back to that moment, like
Good tie in.
that's Trump's desire is to be famous, and there's something about this quarantine moment, just to also bring it into this present moment. So Joe Exotic apparently has coronavirus in prison
Yes, this has been
because
reported.
everything is converging. But also Trump wanted to be the king specifically of New York,
Mm-hmm.
and his inaction is responsible for like the worst pandemic New York has seen in like 100 years. There's something about that desire to be famous, that desire to dominate, the desire to be powerful, the desire to live on this realm of presentation,
Yeah,
and how
and
much it is.
performance, like, like, like meta performance, like a whole other level of performance. Like we all
And
perform all the
he's
time, but yeah.
and every day thousands of New Yorkers are dying, including doctors. It's like e- everything he's doing is the opposite of what he thinks he wants.
I will say
And
one thing.
yeah,
When a couple days ago, when Trump was talking about the refrigerated truck in Queens that had to be brought to the hospital to pull out the bodies, that was one moment in all his fucking hours of pandemic uh, press press briefings when he seemed like maybe he kind of got it. Like that was the day he sort of seemed to realize things were bad. I think I just assumed someone showed him a photo of that truck full of bodies, and he was somehow able to associate it with, because this is in the hospital in the neighborhood where he grew up. I'm pointing because I'm in Queens. It's right over there. But that moment for Trump is almost, I don't want to give him that much credit, but it's almost like Joe Exotic kind of realizing in the end that the chimpanzees should have been
that
free
he
to be
kept in.
chimpanzees. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Uh,
Uh, but the stakes, it's easier to care about animals. I don't know.
it is. It is easier to care about animals, and it's easier to like just see Joe Exotic as a clown and not this guy who like sucked every dollar out of his mom and like
No,
caused people to kill themselves. I
that's
mean,
really
it's just
bad.
like,
He's a bad person. He's
yeah.
funny. He wears sparkly shirts. He's gay and makes country songs about killing women he hates. Like, it's funny, but he's a bad person. Okay, we have to wrap up. So, thank you
Mm,
to those who
mm,
joined us. Thank
mm.
you to Alexis Wong for participating in the live comments. She added Carol's followers pay for the honor of serving at the parks.
Her
So
niece's friend apparently worked in one of those big cat parks. All of it is true. 18-hour days, 7 days a week, $100 a week.
they pay to be exploited like that. So
Ooh, ooh. And somebody asked us, how do we differentiate between reality TV and a documentary?
that's actually a great question
That's a fair question. I think we have to give it 2 minutes.
from the snowboard stuff. Yes. How do we? That and the quick answer for me is window dressing. This documentary was a reality TV show. It was much more artfully put together. I'm not trying to slag reality TV shows that, I have a friend who edits them, and I really respect that craft. But maybe it's a difference between
Yeah.
art and craft in this case.
I feel like reality TV, the difference is the constructed situation. And I
Mm.
feel like documentaries are not as much of a constructed situation.
Ooh.
It's no. And the conversation about the constructed nature of documentary has been part of documentary
Right.
for time immemorial
Yeah,
and from the beginning
yeah.
of the documentary. And we could get into the surrealists and Buñuel's documentary Land Without Bread, and we could go there, but we're not
I
going to.
someday
And
I'll
we're not
show
going to.
you. Someday I'll show you in grad school. I made my own version of Land Without Bread. I did. It was about the homeless in New York City. It was called Men Without Homes.
Oh,
Oh,
oh my God.
anyway.
But I feel like it's like, to me, like the documentarian who I always think about like the most is like Frederick Wiseman, who's like in his like late 80s and still at it.
Mhm.
But it's like the kind of immersive, I'm in this place, I'm here to receive, I'm figuring out a story that I want to tell. And I feel like a lot of documentary from the beginning, but also recently with something like the the act of killing and all this stuff, like they're trying to complicate the notion of the authority of the documentarian.
Right.
I feel like in reality TV, it's just a lot more very obviously constructed, scripted. It's a framework. There's almost something procedural about it
So
because it's the same thing over and over again.
I'm I'm gonna agree and disagree with you. I don't think it's the constructed nature of it that's the key difference. Although I do think that you do see in reality TV those reiterated plot lines.
Yes.
They definitely like a lot of it has to do with the objective, like why they're there. And reality TV is about exploitation. Documentary
Yeah.
can be, but isn't always about exploitation. But fundamentally, reality TV is that, isn't it? It's about exploitation and either observing a situation, real or constructed, or creating a situation that you can piece together into a certain sort of set of predetermined narratives about
Yes.
conflict and the way people interact to create drama.
Yeah.
Whereas,
And
what
yeah,
if
reality. Yeah.
theoretically, a documentary is actually sort of posing a question and a exploring an issue or an idea. And documentary, yes, it may have an agenda, as snowboard staff pointed out. I think
Yeah.
don't all documentaries have an agenda? Yes, they do have an agenda, but that's actually what differentiates them. A documentary is making a point. It wants to
Right.
communicate something to you. It wants
Right.
to maybe convince you of something, maybe teach you about something. It has some kind of purpose. Whereas the purpose of reality TV is to
I think
exploit and entertain.
and I think the purpose of reality TV is to set up a structure that's going to be kind of the same in every episode.
Yeah.
So you can get that satisfaction. Like that
Yeah.
it sets up an expectation that once you know what you're getting, there's a hit of the vein. And even when there's a little
Right.
something different or a little bit of a surprise, it's all a surprise within the structure. It's like Brecht talking about sport. Like,
Yes.
you know that we are setting up the rules of the game and we're going to see it play out within this. Where documentary ideally is going to be a little bit bigger about those rules and allow the documentarian at best will allow him or herself to be surprised by his subject.
Yeah.
Like it's not, and I feel like that's the difference. And I feel like it's almost like Tiger King is a documentary that benefit from reality TV because all the people they're interviewing are being interviewed for a reality TV show, but they don't realize
They're
that the
in a
person
documentary.
filming it is in a documentary.
One
It's
of
reality TV people who don't know they're in a
one of
documentary.
my absolutely favorite things about Tiger King was in the first episode when they first introduce you to each of the characters, and they show you that person being like, should I stand here? Should I? What if I? What if Carol's like? What if I got down on my knees? And Doc Antle's like, all right, you come around to the front door and I'll answer the door like he's directing it. And but they all do it. And so for each one of them, before you even get into meeting them, you're shown how they want to present themselves.
That's right.
You're shown the
That's right.
process of them
That's right.
trying to manipulate how they're going to present themselves. And I thought that was so savvy and really brilliant and subtle because it's not um, hitting you over the head with some kind of
That's right.
agenda of what to think about these people, but it's presenting you a moment that wasn't intended to be presented, at least as far as the subjects were concerned. I love that.
Absolutely. And I think that that's, yeah, I feel like this was a a documentary about people who think they're on reality TV.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. That's the big difference because one ends up being surprised watching it. There are twists and
Oh,
turns that are
every
saved.
episode, like
Every
we were
episode kind
saying
of
this
goes
when we
another
first
layer.
talked about it, that you see the first episode and you think you know what you're watching. And then the second episode happens and you get this whole new perspective on things and like it keeps going like that in each
To the very
episode.
last moment, to
Yeah,
the very last second, it reframes it and
yeah,
reframes it and reframes it.
you're having to, yeah, at the very last moment, like you said with Joe talking about the showing the old footage of Joe when he was saying these animals should not be in Oklahoma, or showing Joe in his undisclosed location saying he regrets not letting chimps be chimps. It, it forces you to go back and reconsider everything you've just watched through a new lens, new perspective. So
Yeah.
it's constantly, it's so carefully choosing how to reveal and when to reveal information to you so that you are processing it in a specific way. And it's not a way that's just for the sake of entertainment or pulling out a familiar, dramatic narrative arc.
And that's where I think also having to watch some of the incredible animal cruelty, like the scene where they're showing this poor tiger giving birth and
Mm.
Joe just like
Okay,
I
all right.
think that yeah,
We are
they're never
over
going to,
time.
we're
We're
wrapping up.
gonna
We're
stop.
wrapping up.
We're gonna.
We're wrapping up.
Let's do.
But I
Let's.
feel like that's part of it.
I agree. I agree.
That's
I'm
just part
sorry
of
to cut you off, listeners, watchers, viewers. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to Dean Madden and Alexis Wan and Ann Humphreys and the snowboard staff for commenting live. Thank you,
it. We love it.
everybody who's watching but didn't comment. And thank you, people who watch and listen after the fact, because this is going to be a podcast episode that will be available wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have more comments to share about this, or you have other stuff you'd like us to ruin, or anything you want to share, please reach out. You can contact us via email. We are saucepodcast@gmail.com.
You can support us at Patreon, patreon.com/saucepodcast for all of our projects that we want
Yes,
to
you can help us get some
project.
projects done and maybe get some bonus material that is only for patrons, as well as access to our Discord channel where we can chat about all of this stuff and stuff from other episodes and all that and interact. If you want to reach me directly, I am at Gynostar on all the various platforms.
You can find me at Maya Garance anywhere you are looking for Maya Garances. Wait, by the way, are we, how drunk are we?
We didn't do a drunkometer. I think I might be a little bit drunk because I switched to añejo. What do you call that? Manhattan,
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm.
or is it reposado? I forget the difference.
This is what I'm drinking. It's really good, guys. It's so good.
Wait, what is it?
It's the Fortaleza. It's just like solid.
But is
tequila.
it joven or añejo or reposado?
I don't know what it is. It's Blanco.
It's blanco, so a joven. It's not aged.
Yeah, it's not
That's
aged.
still
It's
it's
delicious.
good. If it's good when it's not aged, that's a good tequila. It's good quality tequila. Mine's aged so that it looks like whiskey, but it's tequila and it's
You are
delicious.
slurring a little bit. You're slurring just a little bit.
Okay,
Guys,
so I'll
we
say
have
I'm a 6.7. How about you?
I'm at a 2 or 3. Like after I eat dinner, I might even be able to exercise.
We'll see about that.
But guys, we're going to be back. And please let us know what you want us to ruin. We are all stuck in quarantine. We're all watching stuff.
Right? Oh, and
Send it our way.
I watched that fucking movie Outbreak, and I'm gonna watch Contagion, and yeah, we're gonna talk about that. We have a lot. We have a lot to say about movies about.
I think it's going to be one episode where it's just the movies that have one word titles like Outbreak,
They
Contagion,
all have one
Pandemic,
word
like,
titles.
because no, but there's a longer history of like, science fiction movies or things that are related to like disease or whatever. But I
Yeah.
feel like it's like that the episode
Okay.
one of
We'll do the
Contagion
one
is just
word
like,
ones in one episode and then the rest in another. Okay. Thank you, viewers and listeners. And we will be back soon with a very interesting episode about contagion in popular culture. Until then,
mwah.
adios, amibas. Oh, I got outro music.
Oh, you did.